What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Body Lock. It's your man, Ant Walker, joined by my good friends, Drake Riggs and Matt Wells, to discuss some of the more relevant topics out there in the world of mixed martial arts. So I think the most important thing on the docket this evening is Anderson Silva, who has officially been released from his UFC contract. He is no longer with the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the longtime middleweight champion, arguably the greatest fighter of all time, now a free agent. And I say that reluctantly because we have heard for quite some time the retirement talks surrounding Anderson Silva. His last fight where he got knocked out by Uriah Hall a couple weeks back, that was framed as a retirement fight. And Silva was kind of playing into it, but then would backtrack and whatnot. Scott Coker today, after Bellator 253, said that he was not interested in signing Anderson Silva. Now, that was quite a surprise to anybody who's watched a split second of Bellator for the past, 8 years or so. They've picked up a lot of UFC cast-offs and created quite the show around just them. So Anderson Silva would fit wonderfully into that puzzle. But now with Bellator potentially off the table, him no longer with the UFC, the question I ask of you gentlemen, what's next for the greatest middleweight of all time? Matt, I'll start with you.
Man, it's hard to tell what's next for him, really, because he's a guy that always wants to compete no matter what, right? We've seen him, pump fake on retirements a number of times throughout his career. And he's always teased like all these things that he's wanted to do, like box Roy Jones, for example. Well, now that's a thing you can actually do. If Mike Tyson doesn't actually kill Roy Jones in their upcoming fight. So those kind of fun things are out there. And I think that those are the type of things that he should do, considering those are types of exhibition things that will attract fans that won't necessarily put his health at a great risk like they would fighting the Uriah Halls of the world and other knockout artists in the UFC. So I want to see him do that kind of stuff if he is going to be competitive. Do the fun exhibition stuff. If he wants to go over to Ryzen and have some kind of crazy oddball matchup against somebody, that could be fun. Why not? One championship. If they sign him to do something crazy, do it. I mean, I'm here for it. I just don't want to see him do anything to where it's like he's competing against people that are in their prime when he is well past his.
A good point there, Drake. Anything you want to add as far as potential homes for Anderson Silva? Where would you like to see him compete next, if you'd like to see him compete at all?
No, I would. I think it's best, if he just stops right here. I think, finally suffering, pretty legit TKO knockout. This is a good point for him to call it. No, we don't need to see any more legends, tarnishing, just racking up all these L's, which he's getting to that point as well. Well, I mean, he has been at that point, if we're being honest. So, I don't really have any interest in, seeing him fight anymore at this stage. Nothing left to prove, nothing left to do aside from just picking up a paycheck and just being competitive, wanting to compete and do that, be in action. So, don't really want to see it. But me and Pat actually predicted this in our preview of the Uriah Hall fight back before it was going to happen on Halloween. And we both think, speaking for Pat here as well, that unfortunately, Silva could very well land up in bare knuckle boxing. BKFC, you guys. Unfortunately, it's a realistic thing. You got to think about the money they're selling out to these guys and think about it. How enticing to Dave Feldman is Anderson Silva versus Chris Lieben 2 in bare knuckle boxing. That's a complete option now, right? It sells itself for them. Even you could do the crazy Hector Lombard matchup that we were hoping to get when Lombard came over. And even, I don't know how friendly they are, but Vanderlei Silva's in the BKFC now. I mean, you can get so crazy with these options. I'm pretty sure they're going to throw a boatload of cash at Silva. And I mean, that's something different than MMA that he'd probably be down for.
As much as I hate to admit it, that actually sounds like a possibility. Like, it makes my skin crawl, but it does sound like a possibility there, especially they've been able to land a few marquee names very unexpectedly as well. But I'm still leaning toward what I said was going to happen originally when this was billed as his retirement fight, the Uriah Hall fight, that is. I think Anderson Silva will be standing in front of Fedor Emelianenko sometime in Japan. He's going to be standing across from him in a ring in Saitama Super Arena. Probably a New Year's Eve card if they can put that together fast enough. If not, hey, March sounds like a great time to put some fights together. So I'm firmly believing that Anderson Silva will return in Japan. I think that's probably the best option for him if Bellator's off the table. And quite honestly, I don't really believe Scott Coker, to be quite frank. I mean, it's too attractive of a name to pass up on if you have the opportunity to sign him. The only way I think that isn't a possibility is if Bellator is having some financial issues where they don't feel they can afford Silva. That's the only thing that would stop that from happening, in my opinion. I have a hard time believing if you're booking Rampage, the current version of Rampage, who is completely disinterested with what's going on in front of him and is about 2 cupcakes shy of being flat out obese, and you're actually putting him in main events. We just saw him last New Year's Eve. I think Anderson Silva sounds like a great fit for your organization. And let's not put Anderson Silva out to pasture just yet. While he may not be UFC championship caliber anymore, this is still a man who can beat the average middleweight, I think, with ease. Even looking at that Uriah Hall fight, he won the first round, in my opinion. He was in there until he wasn't. Until that knockdown, I think it was the end of the 3rd round. That was a very competitive fight. So even Dana White's, I like to call it a crisis of conscience about booking that he seemed to have post-fight, and it was just terrible, and you can't book him again, and he doesn't need to fight anymore, and blah, blah, blah. I think that was a ruse. We've seen the UFC book people who have been much more washed and looked much, much more shop-worn time after time after time again without any sort of moral hang-ups about it. BJ Penn, namely. BJ Penn had to get knocked out by a random fat guy at a bar in order to lose his UFC contract. Not the fact that he was on a 7 or 8 fight losing streak.
The record.
Right. And hadn't won a fight in damn near 10 years. That didn't mean anything. He got knocked out by a guy at a bar. That's what ended his UFC career. Anderson Silva would wax anybody at a bar right now. So I think under that criteria, he's still a UFC caliber fighter.
That's your bar for acceptance now.
That's the bar that was set. I'm not making up the system. I'm just working within it, baby. I really think that was an effort to devalue Silva for whatever promoter has his services in the near future. Here's we were just mentioning that Roy Jones fight. I think you brought that up, Matt, originally. How weird would this be? Because Roy Jones is a promoter himself. His show runs on UFC Fight Pass. Could we see Anderson Silva versus Roy Jones Jr. on Fight Pass in Pensacola?
Yeah, we absolutely could. Why not? Why not, man? I don't know unless they end up doing it on Fight TV again, like what they're doing with the Mike Tyson thing. But yeah, it could absolutely happen. I mean, let's do it, man. That's the thing that everybody has been wanting for a while, because we've had all of these crazy boxing versus MMA fighter things happening.
Cyborg and Katie Taylor seems to be, being discussed a lot now too. Yeah, so kind of right in that vein,
Yeah, 100%. I mean, obviously, McGregor and Mayweather happened, and Mayweather and Tenshin, like over in Japan, like that. Those are things that are happening these days, right? So there is some interest there from a fan perspective, even though, like, in terms of like proving something to anyone, like it doesn't prove a damn thing. Like when James Toney came and fought Randy Couture, that didn't prove anything except for a boxer doesn't belong in an octagon. Like, just like it's not going to prove anything other than an MMA fighter doesn't belong in a boxing ring. For the most part, there's some exceptions. There are some exceptions, Clay Collard, for example, right? But for the most part, you're not just going to walk into another pro, like in a pro boxer's world, and expect to outbox him for however many rounds. It's just not going to happen. Anderson Silva does have that pro boxing experience from early on. I don't know how much of that would carry over to today's level of fighter that he is now, this diminished version of Anderson Silva with slower reaction times and things like that. But I mean, listen, the fans would buy it. I don't see why they wouldn't shell out $20 for a Roy Jones Anderson Silva pay-per-view on Fight TV. I mean, I would.
I would as well. I think that's kind of a no-brainer. I wouldn't miss that $20 for.
Yeah, don't charge 70 though. Don't go 70.
No, let's not do that. How much did Chuck 203 cost? Was that like $40? I think it was.
I thought it was 55 or something.
See, I had the displeasure of being there in person, so I didn't have to deal with any of the pay-per-view stuff. But I don't know. I mean, $40. I mean, hey, people are doing a lot of strange things for $40. Word around the campfire is these days. But anyway, Anderson Silva, man, I really don't think this is the end for him, and I know his family is probably going to be the biggest deciding factor for him. His family has been trying to get him to retire since the Weidman fight. Since the first one.
See, that's the thing that Drake was talking about earlier, right? Like he doesn't want to see him fight at all. Like I had that mentality as well, but it seemed like because after the Weidman fight, like that was the thing, right? Like he was always talking about his family doesn't want to be away. Well, since then he's fought 10 more times. So it's like I don't care what his family thinks anymore. Apparently they've squashed that beef. Apparently they're just like go ahead, fight again, Anderson. Like we don't care what you do anymore. So I'm rocking with whatever Anderson wants to do now.
Well, I mean, to his credit, as far as his family is concerned, I mean, the first Weidman fight, the obvious playing around that led to his demise in that. So I could see him, telling his sons like, hey, son, I was goofing off, man. It shouldn't have happened like that. I got him this time. And then the leg break, which, devastating. He certainly was losing that fight before that, but it was a devastating injury and kind of a freak thing. That's not something you see all the time. So it's like, hey, it was just a freak injury. I'll be back. He gets that win over Nick Diaz, although that was turned over to a no contest. He originally won that decision. So proving, okay, he is still an elite level competitor, and he's still fought a lot of really good guys since then.
All former champions.
Yeah, and
except for
Cannonier.
Brunson.
What now? Oh yeah, Cannonier and Uriah Hall. Yeah, so I mean, but those are all guys that we think of as the best that the middleweight division has to offer. At least now, they're considered in that category. So, I think there's still a lot of life left in him as a fighter. I don't necessarily think it's very long, for him to kind of play out that version of life for him. But there's still at least two more. There's two more on the table. And if you match him up with people of similar age and experience, sounds like something that people will be into. I mean, would you turn down a trilogy fight with a returning Chael Sonnen? Would you turn that down? Would you turn down to see him and Vitor Belfort do it again in one championship with that very, very stringent VADA testing in effect? I think we'd all sign up happily to watch any of those contests take place. And God forbid he goes to BKFC, we would still watch that as well. So I think there's plenty of left for Anderson Silva to do up until his body really just says screw you and the floor falls out.
I'm glad you mentioned the Chael trilogy, because that's like the one that I would want to see. That's the only thing that I want to see from Silva at this point, just because I love Chael so much and want him to finally get a win officially on the records. We know he beat him twice already, but officially, let's get it in the books. You mentioned Rampage as well, who apparently is completely a free agent now, according to Coker as well. And so that's why I believe him when he's talking about the direction things are going, with how we've seen these recent releases, like Big Country's gone now too, Frank Mir. They let go of a bunch of people who were kind of surprising cuts. There was Carvalho too, who was not really in that age group of those guys I just mentioned, but a former champion in Bellator, kind of a homegrown guy. Sure, he might not have been winning the same anymore or anything, but surprising moves that they've been making. So I believe him, but at the same time, if Chael was like, hey man, you should go get him, I would come back for that. How does he not do it? It's like, it just depends on a couple little variables. And like Fedor too, he would have to work with Coker to get the Fedor fight to happen. And for potentially Fedor's very last fight, because That's what they're working with for the big tour or whatever. Hope they want to do that in Russia, but Japan. I mean, it's like, how do you not do that? It's one of those things. So I believe him, but if something is possible where these other pieces of that puzzle are down to fit and make it happen, he's got to do it, right?
It seems, and it's just too many puzzle pieces sitting there that fit kind of nicely with Silva. Let's also keep in mind another person who has been sitting out, calling out people who have otherwise been inactive. Tito Ortiz, I think, would be would love the opportunity to get in front of Anderson Silva. So there, and a lot of people will watch that. As someone who sat into what looked like a packed forum, Chuck Tito 3, there is a market out there for Tito Ortiz fights. So I think there's plenty left on the table, especially if we're just talking about the money here. Plenty of high value names as well that you can match him up with. There's just the endless possibilities with Anderson Silva. This is not the last we've seen of him. But I got a question for you guys to wrap this up. Now, that one fight that was supposed to be left on his contract that the UFC excused and gave him his release. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that they just let him walk away?
Do you want a real answer, or do you want my fanatical answer, my conspiratorial answer?
Let's get
both. Can we blend them both?
All right. My conspiratorial answer is, because they did the Adesanya fight, right? So that was supposed to be the passing of the torch moment. Well, apparently he didn't pass away the complete torch. So they tried to get him to fight Chimaev, and they were just like, no, we're not doing that. You got to let us go. So that's how we got there.
That would not be surprised if that were true. I simply think they just couldn't hold him. Like if Dana was so dead set on not booking him again, I don't think they legally can just say, hey, we're not going to offer you a fight.
Right. Exactly.
You just kind of, otherwise you're in breach of contract. So they had to let him go, and that saved a lot of money litigation wise. And of course, there's this huge trend now where established fighters are getting cut. Juicy Formiga being the latest example of this. Guys who don't necessarily command a whole lot of money, but they command a lot more money than the Tuesday Night Contender Series people that keep getting signed. I mean, we've had how many weeks of the show this season where like 4 people have been signed, like everybody who won the fight has been signed. There is a roster shift taking place, and Anderson Silva, from a monetary standpoint, just doesn't fit into that picture. So I think that's one reason why he is free to test the waters of free agency.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I don't have much to add to that. That's pretty spot on.
All right. Well, then, maybe I should say a really slick line before we wrap this video up. So
like and subscribe.
Oh, yeah. Boom. Do that.